Hi, Michelle, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Rebecca.
Hi. Happy Thanksgiving, or almost Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so we're probably past Thanksgiving by the time that this runs.
Yeah, that's probably right. So we're not
should
supposed to
probably
date
be
it by
thinking,
pointing out that there's cooking going on right behind us.
We should probably be thinking
anyway.
about things other than the new Sarah Palin book, but such is our lot.
Yeah, I know. Every time, I keep thinking when I do Blogging Heads that the time is going to be past in which now we're not going to talk about Sarah Palin and feminism anymore, and then we're always talking about Sarah Palin and feminism. So,
okay, well, let's introduce ourselves, and then we can talk about Sarah Palin and feminism.
Okay, you go first.
Well, my name's Michelle Goldberg. I'm the author of a couple of books, most recently The Means of Reproduction, and I'm a columnist for the Daily Beast and a columnist for Tablet.
And I am Rebecca Traister, and I am the author of Big Girls Don't Cry, The Election That Changed Everything for American Women, which was just published this fall. And I am usually a senior writer at Salon, though I've been on book leave for a couple months, and I write for other places too, freelance. So, and we are going to kick off once again with Sarah Palin and feminism.
So, I'm kind of getting a little bit tired of the argument about whether Sarah Palin is or is not a feminist. I mean, to a certain extent, I feel like, I actually think she would accept a formulation that I would also accept, which is that she's a feminist in the way that Clarence Thomas is a civil rights activist.
She probably would accept that. I too am tired of it, and I've actually written about it because I think it's with so many questions about gender and sexism, I always find myself complaining about how the questions that we ask are reductive in themselves. Like, this is to my purposes because I wrote a book on it, but after Hillary ran, the question was, A, did she face sexism, which was like, not a particularly useful question. And then the second question was, did she lose because of sexism? And I was like, no, this is not the productive way to talk about it. And I feel the same way about the question of, is Sarah Palin a feminist? Like, they're much bigger and more interesting questions. And to me, the obvious, the is Sarah Palin a feminist is a bad question because nobody's in a position to say who is and isn't a feminist, and it only supports this sort of anti-feminist myth that there's some cabal out there and like a governing structure and membership cards. And I feel like I've said this on Blogging Heads before too. So part of me is frustrated that we're still having this conversation where we sit around and try to say whether she is or she isn't, because it just, in a sense, feeds her argument that out there left-wing women are saying she's not a feminist, when in fact, okay, maybe there are people having this conversation who are saying she's not a feminist. I'm perfectly willing to accept that anybody who wants to get into the feminist conversation can get into it, but then I'm going to vehemently disagree with a lot of them on a lot of issues, and I vehemently disagree with Sarah Palin on a lot of issues.
Well, and even beyond disagreement, I think that she doesn't know anything about feminism. I mean, what's interesting to me about her new book is what a kind of rewriting of the women's rights movement she's engaged in, and just, how kind of she relies significantly in parts on the scholarship of Jonah Goldberg, which I think tells you everything that you need to know in a certain sense. It's just wrong.
Especially
there's so much in it
that's
just wrong in an empirical sense, not in an ideological sense.
Right. Well, let's talk about some of that. I should say that I have read about this book, the new book that's just come out now. I have read about the book, and I haven't actually read the book, and I know that you have read parts of it. I gather, both from what I've read and from what some people who've seen it have told me, that literally the most interesting chapter of the book, which is called America by Heart, the most interesting chapter of the book is her book about feminism and about gender and women's rights and her position on feminism. And I have been told by people that this is honestly the most interesting part of the book.
Right, and it's her chapter about, I think it's called something about Mama Grizzlies. And the whole idea of kind of Mama Grizzlies, or of, these kind of hearth and women, rousing themselves to the political sphere as defenders of hearth and home, is not new. It goes way, way back. Women have been at the forefront of right-wing populist movements for a long, long time. I think, to me, the difference is that you used to have people like Phyllis Schlafly or Beverly LaHaye who would make a career of defending traditional, so-called traditional values, and at the same time be able to defy those values, because they espouse them publicly. So, kind of being a professional anti-feminist actually gave you a way out of the kind of miserable situation that Betty Friedan enumerated. The big difference with Sarah Palin is that those women kind of lived a feminist life in the name of anti-feminism. Sarah Palin doesn't run from the word feminist in the same way. Although she runs from the
toward
entire...
it. I mean, she runs in various directions around it. She hits it from the right. She hits it from the left. She's all positions on it, but she's always moving toward it. It's like feminism is this thing from which Sarah Palin, it has her in its tractor beam, which I am fascinated by, actually.
Well, and I also think that maybe she thinks that by calling herself a feminist, she inoculates herself from some of the most kind of retrograde attacks she makes on various women. I mean, it's very, very interesting that she calls, that she essentially accuses Hillary Clinton of bra-burning militancy.
Right. Okay. Once I want to go back to the Hillary Clinton part very badly for a second and talk about what part that is in her new book. But I also just want to say that I found myself talking about this a lot recently, not only about Sarah, also the other Republican women who, for example, ran in the midterms, and I don't know if you remember this, but Christine O'Donnell, the candidate from Delaware who was so rabidly conservative, also said at one point a few days before the election that her two major influences in life were God and Gloria Steinem. You had her also citing O'Donnell citing Hillary Clinton right and left on the campaign trail. Sarah Palin herself cited Hillary Clinton right. Like the first day she became the vice presidential nominee, cited Hillary Clinton and Geraldine Ferraro before her. I mean, and my take on this is, it just drives many people around the bend, and to some degree it drives me around the bend. But I honestly, in comparison to like the Phyllis Schlafly take, I have appreciated, which is not to say not questioned thoroughly and been incredibly irritated by aspects of it, but I sort of appreciate the honesty because there are things about which I think that Palin and the Mama Grizzlies have been more direct. They are saying, yes, we have benefited from Title IX. Yes, we have benefited from the advances. And they certainly we can talk also about how they cast back to the suffrage movement quite often. And I actually would rather have that starting point of honesty, because previously in these, from extremely conservative women, for example, the Schlafly, you've had a complete rejection and vilification of everything connected to feminism, even while we can blatantly see that she is living out many of feminism's victories by having a public voice, a career, And
the thing is that it's basically a signal. I mean, this is a very familiar right-wing pattern, right? You could see it very much with the civil rights movement. You fight it tooth and nail until you can't fight it anymore, until it's become enough of a consensus. Even if feminism as a word isn't a consensus, its gains are, there's no broad-based support for turning back the vast majority of its major gains. Right. So you fight it. Then at a certain point you realize you can't fight it anymore. Then you say that the movement has succeeded, you've supported it all along, and in fact you are its purest exemplar. Right. I mean, that's exactly what they did with Martin Luther King, who was, and the entire civil rights movement was demonized by the right, was, quite assaulted by the right, was persecuted by the right, until the moment at which the right realized that it had lost. And then it said that it had been with Martin Luther King all along, and that in fact Martin Luther King was the biggest exemplar of kind of conservative faith-based politics. And now and now you see someone like Glenn Beck, who's a tremendous race baiter, who's still at the same time pays fealty to Martin Luther King, even whilst kind of simultaneously desecrating his memory. Right. So this is a pretty familiar pattern. And the good thing, it signals progress in that it's, in that you don't kind of get to this part of it until the gains have been, in some sense, been consolidated. It does show to a certain extent that feminism has come of age.
It's raised the place from which you start in your conservative attacks on it to a place in which it's basically, in which some forms of it or some version of it is presumed to be the moral starting place, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what she gets, because here's this chapter, and she has been for the 2.5 years she's been on the political scene. Sarah Palin has been talking very publicly about feminist history, whether it's talking about Susan B. Anthony, whether it's talking about, and there's one of her advisors on the vice presidential campaign told me for my book, and this is from somebody who was working with her, that during the campaign Sarah Palin expressed to her that she was very upset that Gloria Steinem hated her. And said to this advisor, again, this is something that a source who worked with Palin told me that I reported in my book, said, why does Gloria Steinem hate me? I'm a feminist. And in fact,
didn't you say that she asked, didn't you say that she asked her that, like, at the very end of the campaign?
Yes, when it was over. This is a story from a source of mine, Elaine Lafferty, who talked to me on the record for the book and was Palin's feminist advisor. Elaine Lafferty is somebody who had worked in feminist circles for many years and who, in fact, had been the editor of Ms. Magazine for a period, and then went on and worked in a volunteer capacity for Hillary Clinton's campaign, and then was one of those very, very few professional left-wing feminists to jump the fence and work with Palin when she was nominated for the vice presidency. And I talked to Elaine a lot for this book, and this is a story she told me and backed up and told me again and backed up. And she says that at the end of the campaign, Palin, she had this conversation with Palin where Palin said, why does Gloria Steinem hate me? She was my hero. I'm a feminist.
Which to me is astonishing. If Sarah Palin, to me that's just an astonishing level of political cluelessness. Just that she had been, after months and months of right-wing demagoguery, that she wouldn't recognize, if nothing else, that Gloria Steinem is a liberal.
Yes, but I do think that it taps into ideas from which lots of people on all sides of the ideological fence are not immune, which is that there is some way, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, I certainly hear it a hell of a lot from people I talk to and out on the road, this sense that maybe for some people gender would trump politics, and for example, that's something that happened with Elaine Lafferty. This was a lifelong Democrat and liberal who went to work for Sarah Palin. We know that that's very rare, certainly when it comes to voting patterns. We're constantly sort of reminding people that women don't just vote for other women. They vote, in elections. They tend to vote based on the party loyalty, but also more than that on issues. And they don't just go and vote for the other chick. However, there are lots of people who do believe, there are people out there who believe that gender, and especially history-making gender, should trump partisan politics. And that might be an expression of that. And I do hear that a lot from lots of different people.
Which is one of those things that I find... I think if that was true, if that was really the goal of the feminist movement, was just kind of more women, whoever they are, then it would be a movement that I would want nothing to do with. Sarah Palin writes in her book that her political hero... above all is Margaret Thatcher. Mm-hmm. Should British feminists have supported Margaret Thatcher? It strikes me that the answer is so obvious, especially in that feminism, and this is a discussion we've had many times before, and we both know that feminism is not just, the slogan of feminism is not just "you go girl." It's a social movement designed to kind of change certain things about the status quo. Sarah Palin's whole message is that feminism has done its work and that the status quo is now adequate for women to be able to kind of realize their ambitions, and that there is no need for kind of further, government policy or kind of further social agitation.
Right.
So it's basically, her movement is basically, I'm a feminist, but we don't need feminism anymore.
Right. Which, by the way, also mirrors the rhetoric of lots of men, lots of anti-feminist conservative men who have run. It doesn't, there are lots of people, this is a whole, in some ways, Sarah Palin, in a sense, is friendlier to feminism, but not by much than Rick Santorum. There's this sense that you can sort of say, look, it's this whole argument that women have achieved all their goals and there's nothing left for us to do and we've now conquered the world, so, we can be done with worrying about gender. the other thing, I would say that I am somebody who was happy to see, and I think you'll understand that when I say this, that I'm not suggesting exactly any kind of gender-based solidarity at all. I was happy to see a lot of Republican women running in the midterms this year, and I'm happy that Sarah Palin is out there, but it's not because, I'm happy that Sarah Palin is out there in the sense that I believe that if we're working toward actual gender parity in politics, it is absolutely crucial that we not just have women who we can lustily cheer for, that we also have women that we go out and vote against with as much venom as we voted against men. I think we need...
Right, so we have gender parity in political villainy.
Yes, of course, that's part of politics is villainy. And so... And right. In fact, I think it hurts. I think it hurts women in politics certainly when we sort of treasure this idea that women are going to be better than their male counterparts. Right? That hurts a lot of the actual women out there running for office and in office because we have, when you're shut out of power, you get to have the fantasy that like, oh, if women were in power, we'd have no war or whatever. Right? And women around the world would tell us that that's of course crap, that's just not true. But so I actually think it's tremendously valuable. You need women on both sides of the aisle. You need women who are good and bad and smart and stupid and left and right and all this. And so I'm just as happy that it's Palin and the Mama Grizzlies out there who I am desperate to see defeated than that it's Newt Gingrich out there who I'm, that's part of what it will look like to have more women in the process. But I'm anxious to talk about her view of feminist history. Now, you again have read have read parts of the chapter, right?
Right. Well, one of the things she does, again, that's really, really infuriating, and it owes a lot to the conservative movement. It owes a lot to Glenn Beck and to kind of his whole stable of revisionist historians, is that she quotes Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she quotes, she quotes the Seneca Falls Declaration, which borrows from the Declaration of Independence and uses the phrase "nature's God." Now, something that the Christian right has been doing for a long, long, long time is kind of cherry-picking phrases from various historical documents, including the Declaration of Independence, where they talk about God or talk about the Creator, and say that this meant that the founders intended a Christian nation. So that they weren't, in fact, kind of deists or free thinkers or at most, fairly kind of establishment Protestants, but that they were evangelical Christians, and that this shows that, the history of the United States has been perverted by secularists. She does something quite similar with Elizabeth Cady Stanton when she says, she quotes her, and then she says, could you imagine a feminist, a self-described feminist today talking about God and nature's God and how our rights derive from God? And she basically makes it out as if Elizabeth Cady Stanton had politics quite like Sarah Palin's, as if Elizabeth Cady Stanton was this kind of, pious, again, maternalist, traditional type of suffragette. Most women existed. There were kind of pious, conservative, traditional suffragettes. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton was so not one of them. She was certainly, she was so much a fierce critic of traditional religion. She wrote a book called The Women's Bible, which was essentially, designed to kind of take on the patriarchy in the traditional Bible. She was, one of the reasons, according to, I believe it's, she was, I should find the citation before I say this, but she was a big crusader for divorce reform. And so Sarah Palin does two different things. One is that she kind of falsifies the record of certain people that she wants to lionize. She also falsifies the record of people that she wants to defame. Most egregiously, Margaret Sanger.
What does she say about Margaret Sanger?
Well, she relies, and she cites him in the book. She relies on Jonah Goldberg's liberal fascism, which is, astonishing that you would think that if you were writing a book, I understand that she's no great researcher, although she's been pretty defensive about her reading habits and insists that she reads widely. you would think that if you were going to write a passage in a book, you would at least take the initiative to say Google it. You know. So she basically quotes Jonah Goldberg that Margaret Sanger is a, quote, Nazi-like eugenicist. Yeah. And the thing about Margaret Sanger is that she is like, you know, she's a really imperfect, complicated person who was prey to many of, you know, she was prey to some of the prejudices of her time and transcended others. She has a really, eugenics was very much a part of the American political conversation across the political spectrum in before World War II. You know, I mean, kind of everybody was a eugenicist. The Catholic Church used eugenic arguments against birth control. They said, you know, it'll stop the breeding of the best kind of people. Other people used eugenic arguments in favor of birth control. But what's really important to remember about Margaret Sanger is that although she used that kind of dialogue, she was never, ever, ever and actually Sarah Palin kind of says she used eugenic art, that she wanted to stop breeding unfit people, and then she said like something like especially black people. That's just, you know, you can't. I guess you can't legally libel the dead, but that's essentially what she's doing. I mean, Margaret Sanger did believe in eugenics to create better people, but she didn't believe that some races were better than others. You know, she was never a racist. She worked very, very closely with, among others, W.E.B. Du Bois. She was, I mean, she got her name Sanger from her Jewish husband. She was, when Martin Luther King received the Margaret Sanger Award in the early 60s, you know, he wasn't able to accept it in person, so his wife went and accepted it on his behalf and delivered a speech that he had written about how crucial Margaret Sanger was to the kind of uplift of African Americans and how twinned the civil rights struggle was to the struggle for reproductive rights.
Well, this is, I mean, in part, one of the lessons that this reaffirms, which and it's a lesson we learn all the time, is, okay, we start what you said about Margaret Sanger to begin with, which is that, you know, often our leaders are imperfect. And often our progressive leaders are imperfect. And we can see that in everybody, in Sanger, in Betty Friedan, in Martin Luther King. I mean, you know, there is, find me the perfect person who took us to a new plane, right? It doesn't exist. And so there are these things to play on. But then, as you point out, what Palin does is sort of fail to Google. You know, in addition to sort of the thoughtful, you know, a sort of thoughtful consideration or reconsideration of the people who came before us politically or ideologically, which, you know, by its nature, you know, does include sort of considering the ways in which they were nuanced, imperfect, in which they changed the world and simultaneously troubled us. And, you know, okay, so she doesn't do that. But that's a hard thing for any of us to do, right? But she just, as you're pointing out, she just gets it wrong. And the part that I've read that is really fascinating to me is, well, there are a few people, more recent people, who she just gets wrong in this chapter about feminism, including Hillary, who she writes about, and she says, I have tremendous respect for her, but she writes about her in 1992, and she particularly cites the comment that got a lot of attention at the time. This is when Bill was running for president for the first time, and she said in an interview, I believe on 60 Minutes, I'm not just some little woman standing by my man like Tammy Wynette. And what Palin writes about that is that Hillary in 1992 appeared to be, and this is a quote, frozen in an attitude of 1960s era bra-burning militancy. And I have so many things to say about that one little sentence, which is, first of all, easily Googleable is that there was no bra burning. Okay, that's one of the basic tenets. Yeah. And by the way, if there was, it wasn't going to have been in the 1960s. Okay, but there wasn't. So the 1960s era bra burning militancy. Secondly, Hillary Clinton is about as far from the 1960s era bra burning militancy when it comes to the history of second wave feminism as it's not as far as you can get, but you know. Also, the stand by your man comment might be the most ironic comment she could have picked in retrospect. It was not a rejection. Right. I mean, my God, it was absolutely not a rejection of marriage. It was not a rejection of, I mean, and look what happened. I mean, this is the comment for which Hillary unfortunately paid for years after, when she in fact did stand by a man. This was the anger at Hillary in 1992 was around, mostly, I'm surprised she didn't use the stay home and bake cookies comment, which was the thing that Hillary said.
No,
she uses that as well. I could have stayed home and baked cookies and had teas, but I did what I decided to do, which was fulfill my profession.
Right. No, Sarah Palin uses that quote, too, and accuses her of basically propping herself up by defaming or by insulting homemakers.
Okay, can I tell you what the second half of that Hillary quote was? That exact moment, actually. After she said that I don't stay home and bake cookies in a diner, in running, in the midst of the campaign, and it was in the midst of, she and her husband were being attacked by Jerry Brown because of her claims that her law profits were a conflict of interest for his candidacy, given his political place in Arkansas. And so she said this cookie thing, and then all the reporters who were there were sort of rushed out of the diner, and then she came out of the diner. So this is within moments of having said, I didn't stay home and bake cookies. And she said, and nobody ever reports this part, but this is what Sarah Palin should have Googled, okay? I'm a big believer in women making the choices that are right for them. The work that I have done as a professional, and by the way, she's absolutely being accurate here about her work up to this point. The work that I've done as a professional, as a public advocate, has been aimed at trying to assure that women can make the choices they should make. Whether it's full-time career, full-time motherhood, or some combination. Hillary Clinton, that same day she said the cookies thing, was also talking about trying to enable women to make choices which she openly defined as being full-time career, full-time motherhood, or some combination of the two. This is just, Palin is going on the most deeply unresearched mischaracterizations of Hillary in 1992. And I also gather, I've read that she's also talking about Betty Friedan, as sort of this, the person who exploded, the American family with the feminine mystique in 1963. Betty Friedan, too, this is, Mystique is one of the most widely misremembered texts out there, as far as I can tell. Because, in fact, Friedan, who is, talk about an imperfect hero, Friedan is somebody who was actually taken to task and has been for years by progressives on a number of counts, including that she did not put enough blame on men for their role in their privileged role in keeping women repressed and suppressed within homes. She also said throughout her life, and especially in later years, that that part of what she wanted to do with the feminine mystique was identify what was making women unhappy, which was, for middle-class white women, in her view, being stuck in homes attached to vacuum cleaners with babies on every hip, and not being, there being no avenue for which they might find fulfilling work and a more fulfilling and balanced life. And so she was pushing them to go to school, to study, to volunteer, to work part-time, to work full-time. One of the things she had said retrospectively is that one of the reasons she was doing this was because she wanted to make them better wives and mothers. It wasn't a rejection of marriage, motherhood, or family. It was, in fact, her plan to strengthen the American family, which, by the way, she considered a heterosexual nuclear unit.
Right, yes. No, she was grotesquely anti-lesbian.
Oh, grotesquely. Homophobic on every, I mean, yes. And, but...
Right, no, so, yeah, the idea that she was somehow, that her kind of primary goal was to break down the American family. But again, what strikes me is there's a certain, audacity in, either Sarah Palin or her ghostwriters, kind of writing this book that it's not even secondhand sources. It's, it's
yes.
third-hand sources. It's kind of a collection of impressions about the most kind of, ridiculous caricatures that you find in various right-wing bestsellers. To me, what the book shows above all is that, again, Palin's been talking lately about how insulted she was about questions about her reading and that she, constantly reads biographies. There was that New York Times magazine story by Robert Draper about her inner circle. And, at one point she said she was going to read the new Glenn Beck book, and then she said, oh no, now it's going to look like I just read Glenn Beck. It does.
It looks like she just reads Glenn Beck.
She just reads Glenn Beck. She reads Glenn, this is a book that's like basically written by a mind nurtured on Glenn Beck.
And Dan Quayle. Because, the other joy about that chapter, right? Do you know the other person she really takes after in that chapter? Again, I've gathered this from reading reports of the chapter. I haven't read it myself. So Sarah Palin, if you're watching this, which I really doubt you are, if I'm wrong in interpreting this, I will come back and correct in some way. But I gather that she spends several pages writing about Murphy Brown.
Oh, yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And what's astonishing, again, is that she simultaneously kind of criticizes Murphy Brown while, not just kind of not noting the hypocrisy regarding her own daughter, but then she praises works like Juno and what was the one with Katherine Heigl?
Where they say much more, where they won't even say the word abortion.
Right, because these are about kind of, people making pro-life choices.
Which is what Murphy Brown did.
It's astonishing that it's somehow responsible that, kind of a professional woman with the means to raise a child choosing to be a single mother is a sign of cultural decline, whereas a kind of feckless teenager deciding to be a single mother is a sign of a culture of life. I mean, it's astonishing. It makes me wonder if she's even really thought through the contradictions, or if it's nuts. And the other thing that's nuts, of course, is that when was the last time anybody was talking about Murphy Brown?
When Dan Quayle was doing it in 1992. I mean, This is precisely, and Sarah Palin has been extraordinarily lucky so far to escape the fate of Dan Quayle. Okay, Dan Quayle is the vice presidential candidate and then the vice president to whom she is most readily compared or comparable, and yet she has somehow, despite any number of Quayle-like gaffes, managed to hold the public in thrall in ways that I find totally fascinating and bewildering and interesting. But she should not be making any connections to Dan Quayle's history if she knows what's good for her. She should step as far away from the Quayle as humanly possible.
Do you think, I think she's running for president, do you?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think she is, and I have to say that I almost have developed a little bit of affection for her in recent, I would, I don't mean to suggest that I have developed any kind of ideological affection for her at all. And in fact, reading about this chapter and this book, drives me absolutely nutty. But I have enjoyed watching her make her party squirm. Mm-hmm. Okay? I have loved that. It is, she is completely her own agent at this point. I think, of course, she's running for president, but then I think no one knows that because I think she's so cut off from advisors, from party, I think only Sarah Palin knows what she's doing, and I think Sarah Palin might think she's doing something else next week if she feels like it. And I kind of, from a distance and from a antipathetic distance, I sort of have a rugged admiration for this kind of entirely new model of or at least entirely new female model of completely solo operating female candidacy or potential candidacy. But I do think it's really impossible. She could change her mind at any minute. Mm-hmm. And, but yes, as far as I can tell, she's totally running for president. I don't know if we have more to say about Sarah Palin, we should, but I think that as long as we're talking about revisionist feminist history, I know that you wanted to maybe say a few words about remaking Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, I know that there are many kind of crises and atrocities befouling the planet right now, but this is probably the worst.
That's a bold statement.
No.
Do you want to explain what's happening? Because I didn't know until yesterday. I didn't understand what was going on until yesterday.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was as far as I'm concerned, and I don't mean this with winking irony in any sense at all, the second best television show of modern times, after The Wire.
The second best?
Yes, after The Wire.
Okay.
Is being, it was originally a movie, a kind of a terrible, kitschy movie that then became what should have been a terrible, kitschy television show, but instead became this really fairly profound work of art that actually created an entire mythology about female coming of age, a kind of mythology that had not previously existed. There's all kinds of mythology about male coming of age, but it was a really, really, I mean, it was funny and sometimes, kind of glib and sarcastic, but it was also astonishingly kind of rich and intricate. And since then, the sainted creator, Joss Whedon, who is also an extremely outspoken feminist, he's not been successful with his, later TV shows. They keep getting canceled. And so for reasons that I cannot comprehend, it's being remade without him attached. And with somebody who, as far as I can tell, has never written a feature film before.
Yeah, I don't think she hasn't written a feature film before. It's
just absolute. It's so bizarre and kind of disrespectful, and I mean, it's just, especially given that the thing that made this television show kind of great and that created so many devoted fans. And I first heard of Buffy when I was working at Salon many, many years ago when it first came out. And I remember these emails would ping around, everybody talking about last night's episode.
Joyce Millman was a great Buffy chronicler, right? She was a Salon television critic at the time.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Laura Miller, I think both Stephanie Zaharek and Charlie Taylor, I mean, everybody there was obsessed with it. And I kind of, at first didn't quite know what to make of it and couldn't imagine why all of these people who seemed so much older and smarter and more sophisticated than me were watching this television show, but I, kind of quickly got it. But the whole reason that it has a cult following is because of this, kind of feminist intelligence underlining it. It's not just because it's a hot chick beating people up.
Right.
And so, this is an atrocity. And the only reason it's worth bringing up is because it seems that there must be some way to bring Joss Whedon back.
Well, the thing that confuses me about it is why. I mean, and this is one of these silly questions when they're remaking Ghostbusters or whatever. But why it is that they need to remake Buffy now? I mean, was the idea that Joss Whedon wanted to do the movie and another movie because he's the writer for the original Buffy movie, which was so unlike what later became the television show. He was the screenwriter for the one that involved
and they kind of didn't let him do what he wanted, and that's how the television show emerged. Right.
So I don't know the backstory. I mean, it seems to me it was one thing if Joss Whedon had been wanting to make a Buffy movie with, I don't know, Sarah Michelle Gellar or some other cast of his choosing, and they didn't let him do it, and instead had this woman do it with her. I don't remember her last name.
No, either do I.
That is one thing. The other thing that I can't understand is why can't we tell a new, interesting, young woman's story? I mean, why do we is this really the only sort of funny, smart, ironic, feminist text that we can return to make a fun movie about a young woman and vampires?
Well, and to me, this is
what troubles me is why can't we get have a little bit of a deeper library here by actually, and I'm, if this young, I think she's young, writer, director, I don't know if she's going to direct too or not, but if this young writer wants to tell a tale that makes her, she says she's been a huge fan of Buffy as a young person, And if she wants to tell a tale that in some way evokes the spirit of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then by all means, go for it. I mean, fantastic. You know, among the many things that Hollywood needs right now are young female writers to be out there telling their stories. But it depresses me slightly that the story she wants to tell as a fan of Buffy is Buffy's story.
You know, and then the other part of this is that Joss Whedon was attached for a long time to a Wonder Woman remake, which he was then kind of removed from, or it fell apart. So, I mean, this is kind of in the context of Hollywood's inability to tell, you know, kind of real adventure stories, or, you know, kind of to have these, you know, to tell kind of pop culture versions of stories about women of the kind that
heroic womanhood.
What?
Heroic womanhood is the Wonder Woman, Buffy. I mean,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a small thing. I understand in the broader scope of...
No, it's not a small thing. It's culture. It's the culture as we absorb it. It's Hollywood is our, you know, tells stories, and it very rarely tells good stories about women. So when you have one of your best, you know, messed with, it is a big deal. It's a very big deal. If there were 1,000 Buffys out there, if there were 1,000 shows or movies as good and smart about women as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then it wouldn't be that big a deal to have one thing that you happen to like, you know, screwed around with. But the fact is there are not thousands of great stories about young women or about heroic womanhood. There are not great presentations in Hollywood or on television. I mean, there are some, and that's a much larger story, but there are not enough good narratives about women out there. And so when you have an extraordinarily rare thing, and then you have somebody come in and have the person who made it, who helped to make it so strong and so great and smart, is taken away from it. You know, it's not just, it's also the risk of like destroying what has meant a lot to popular culture and its apprehensions of you know, femininity and strong femininity.
So the last thing we were going to talk about before we both go and start getting ready for Thanksgiving, and I know, do you have to fly anywhere for Thanksgiving?
No, I don't, and I've been flying around for like 3 months doing book stuff, and on my last trip, which was, I guess, a week ago, I was coming back from San Francisco, and I saw the new screeners in the airport. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to, I mean, they weren't really being used, but they were moving the big new TSA screeners in the electronic ones.
Yeah, you know, I fly a lot too,
and
I haven't, I mean, I was just in Spain last week, and I haven't gone through any of this yet. So I'm not quite sure if the new procedures aren't in place at JFK. I don't know what's going on. But
yeah, I don't know either. As of last week, I saw the big new machines, but I just went through the regular one.
But it's amazing, you know, it's amazing to me that there is this, I'm not sure what to make of the incredible outrage. I mean, on the one hand, I'm happy that there's any kind of revolt against the incredible degradation and dehumanization of the whole flying experience. I mean,
yes,
to me, there's nothing worse in kind of the normal course of modern American life for a middle-class person. There's no other situation in which you get treated with the kind of like, you know, Soviet-style contempt, degradation, infantilization. I mean, there's nothing like it. And so I'm glad to see people basically finally saying this is a step too far. But at the same time, I'm like, really, this is a step too far? I mean, this is on two grounds. One, this is a step too far in terms of the incredible kind of inconvenience and absurdity of the TSA, which it seems to me makes these kind of incredibly reactive rules and then is afraid to walk them back for fear of letting everybody know that there was no need for them in the first place. Like that crazy 3-ounce rule that is always very kind of sporadically enforced. Anyway, you know, or do you remember for a while they were saying you couldn't get up during the last hour of a flight?
Oh yeah, that was very brief. They walked that back without even announcing they were walking it back.
Right, they just stopped doing it. But, so they kind of do these things, you know, they've been doing, honestly, like if some, you know, to me these kind of X-ray machines or whatever they are, far from the kind of most degrading thing about the, experience of modern air travel. But then the other thing is the civil liberties side of it. On the one hand, I'm glad that people are finally up in arms about some erosion of their civil liberties. But again, like this, not warrantless wiretapping,
right. There's a very compelling argument being made online right now in certain sectors that I've seen. I actually saw it. It was in a comments thread on Jezebel about the TSA scanners, and then Marcos at Daily Kos picked it up and wrote a very compelling post about it, which is that now they've come for the white man's liberties, right? And that this is the thing that is making national news, in part because it's not Black people who, are walking out of their homes and being frisked by police. It's not racial profiling on highways.
Right, and
it's not. Right. This is a guy flying to Milwaukee to his sister-in-law's house, for Thanksgiving, who's getting felt up, and that for some reason this crosses when it's not. What has happened with this, and this is I have found this argument very compelling, because you're exactly right that there is this question, why this? Do you know how many civil liberties violations are out there every day, every second? I mean, my husband's a criminal defense attorney. The stories of people, his clients, who literally walk out their door in the morning to buy eggs or to go for a walk or to go to their jobs, and you walk out your door, you're not even going to an airport, you're not getting on a plane, you are walking out your front door, and somebody can frisk you.
Right, and the idea that you can, what has people so outraged is the idea that you can be both presumed guilty and subsequently manhandled. And that's such a daily experience for so many people.
Exactly. It is daily reality. It is what cops say is, the drill.
And so it would be, and it would be a great thing if this actually sensitized people to the horror of that daily reality. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening. Instead, it seems like what they're saying is, no, you need to profile so that you don't do this to us. But
exactly.
But I was in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and so whenever people call for Israeli-style profiling, they actually, I have a feeling they don't really know what that means, and they also wouldn't tolerate it. Israeli profiling does mean that some people get to go through quite quickly, and other people are questioned for many minutes or maybe hours, and have to go through, say, a 3-hour, security process instead of a 45-minute one. But it also means you get asked questions that are incredibly personal. Last time I was there, as I was leaving, the woman came up to me, and, they have to be kind of quite specially trained. It couldn't just be TSA people asking these questions. But she asked me, first what I was doing there, but then she asked me, are you Jewish? Yes. She said, well, where do you go to synagogue? I said, I don't go to synagogue. I'm an atheist. Well, did you grow up Jewish? Yes. Did you go to Hebrew school? Yes. Do you celebrate the high holy days? Do you know any prayers? Do you consider yourself part of a Jewish community? So she's kind of asking me, and I kind of thought, I can't believe I'm having this discussion in an airport. I can't believe I have to kind of limb the contours of my Jewish identity for an airport, and my kind of theological convictions for an airport screener. I guess eventually I convinced her that I, had the background that I said I had. But just imagine the same Republicans who kind of went into a national freakout over the census. If some security person started asking them these kind of questions, it would be completely untenable. Right.
Not to mention the fact that, and I know this is a comparison that other people have made, and it's not quite as, the specifics are different, but this freak out about being touched or looked at in a public place, and we have, and one of the fights of conservatives is to, limit what happens within a woman's body reproductively, right? You think it's bad to be groped, which it is. You know what else is bad? Is to be forced to carry a child that you don't want to or cannot carry.
Or have a forced vaginal ultrasound. Talk about
Yes. Yeah, look, I remember And this is again reproductively. I remember when I was writing, this must have been in 2006 or 2007, the federal government put out guidelines that all women of childbearing age should be treated as pre-pregnant. I mean, this is told what they should eat and the vitamins they should take, and that their doctors should be preparing them to be vessels for children. I mean, that was the federal government's knew that, you know, the FDA, their regulations were that all women between the ages of whatever it is, 18 and 40 or something, should be medically treated as though they were pre-pregnant. You know, that is the way that women's bodies are regarded by the federal government. You know, and, you know, even with the freedoms that Roe v. Wade provides us with, you know. And yet, this idea, what we cannot stand is, and by the way, I don't mean to say I'm in any way supportive of the being groped or being scanned or all that stuff. I mean, I do see it as a violation. I see it as a violation of civil liberties. I see it as a process that, like so much else, will eventually just come down to profiling again. Mm-hmm. You know? Whether or not they're doing it completely at random right now, like so many things of this nature, it probably, likely, in a matter of time, when enough people bitch about it, will come down to it only happening to certain kinds of people. I think so. In all these regards, I view it as an abomination. But on the other hand, there is so much else out there that is an abomination and a violation and an intrusive violation of rights, freedoms, civil liberties. That I find it very fascinating that this is the thing that has become, you know, the point of the flashpoint for anger in this country. And I have to question whether or not it's because it's this segment of people happening.
Yes, although again, I'm going to say, you know, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, it really would be something to be thankful for if this created among people a new sense of appreciation for one's physical sovereignty.
Right.
And for the kind of intolerability of innocent people being presumed guilty by a dehumanizing bureaucracy.
Yes, that would be wonderful, and I think we should leave it on that very upbeat and extremely optimistic note.
Well, happy Thanksgiving, Rebecca.
Happy Thanksgiving, Michelle. Thank you. It was fun.
Okay, thanks. Hope to do it again soon.
Bye.
Bye.